Hello and welcome to Faith Talks. In today's program, we'll be addressing one of the principal questions under discussion between atheists and theists. Does God exist? Joining me in the discussion today and ready to share their views and opinions are Geert Tapp and Karen Victorik. How do we even prove that God exists?
How do we prove it? If we were able to prove it, I guess that would have immediately sort of taken away the fact that God is God. I mean, someone said it a long time ago, said like, trying to prove God is like trying to prove something that doesn't want to be proven in that sense. I don't think that God is something that is within our limits or within our powers to just say like, here he is. I mean, from my personal experience, I would possibly be able to point to certain things where I feel it, but just to say like, well, this is how we prove God, I think that is quite a big question to answer.
Well, we talk about faith, don't we? Some people talk about religion, but I prefer to talk about faith. And whether you are a Muslim or a Christian or a Buddhist, it doesn't matter. It's about faith. It's not about proving the existence of something beyond this materialistic, mundane reality that we can see and touch and feel. It's about believing that there's something beyond that.
I think there are certain moments in your life and certain times in the day, if you have your eyes open for it, that you want to find it, you want to see something. That's where things all of a sudden come close to you and you think like, that must be it. That must be it somehow. But it's true what you say, Karen. You need to first believe in it. I mean, if you don't want to believe in it, I don't believe there's any way to prove it to someone who said like, well, I just don't want to believe it.
A relative of mine grew up as a Christian, and he was talking with one of his friends who grew up as a total atheist, didn't believe in anything. And this friend asked my relative, well, how does it work? You know, what's it like to believe in God? And my relative just said, I can't describe it to you. It's like a different dimension. If you haven't experienced it, there's nothing to compare it with.
But if you can't describe it, how do I know that that is what I've experienced?
I mean, in a way, when you ask this kind of question, like how can you then can experience it or something like that, I think it's something deep within us that is sort of looking for something. Whether we do believe in a God or not, you do still see that people are searching for something. And in what way they experience it, that will be so different for different people. That is, I think, a very personal matter of how you experience something that is existing or not. I think it was Bob Dylan who said something like that. Everyone wants to believe in something, he said in one of his songs. Whether you believe in God or the devil or something else, but everyone wants to believe in something.
And if you look at the world's history, look at all the different cultures and countries and nations, it's only in the last, 150 years that people have even had a concept of living a life without faith in something outside of this very material reality. All cultures on earth through all of time have had faith or religion.
But then in today's world, as we walk around in the time we live in at the moment, people are wanting to prove. I want to prove it. You know, you are guilty or you're not guilty until proven the other way around. We really have a lot of burden on proof, and it becomes kind of a burden for Christians to feel they have to prove God. But do we need to prove God?
I mean, in my line of work, when I'm coming across people, just in different places, these are sort of questions that often eventually come to the surface in a conversation like, so you believe in a God then? Now prove it to me. And that's where I know that conversation gets into an area where I need to become very careful. Because it's not in my power to sort of say like, well, here he is, or here, this is what God is. I think I can only then make it maybe more personal. Explain or describe in some way like, so this is how I experience God in my life. And I know that that would be completely different for that person. I mean, for myself, for instance, I only start to really realize that God existed when I was 18. Yet I grew up in a Christian family, in a church and everything. And yet my real experience with God was when I was 18. That's when I, for the first time, really started to experience that God really exists. But that was me, so that was 18 years. So who am I to say to a person who asked me the question, now here it is, and now you need to start believing. When you're married, I mean, I'm married, but before I was married, people could say like, well, this is what marriage life is like. And this is what real love will look like. And with every girlfriend that you would have had, you would think like, well, this is now really it. until you really got married, you start to realize what is real marriage, what is real love. In that real relationship, when you start building it, you have to experience it. And I can experience it in my way, but if I were to have to explain it to someone else who's looking at it to maybe step into a relationship, that still will not help much. I can describe it in some way, what it is for me, but that person would have to experience it in their own way.
I think what you were saying about growing up in a Christian background with a Christian subculture. I have a friend who grew up in a totally secular culture. None of her family is Christian at all. And she just had this longing inside her for God. And she met some Christians. She started to believe in God. She read the Bible. She got baptized. And she lives a Christian life to this day. But none of her family are Christian.
No.
And so it is something within us, I think. Within most people, we long for something outside of this world.
Yeah.
Something more powerful, somebody that doesn't let us down, somebody who loves us unconditionally.
That's interesting, because I at the moment have a communication line with a person who's also an atheist. But every time when we talk with one another, I get this sense of, I mean, in his questions that he said, like, so prove it to me then, or tell me what it is like. I almost get a sense like he is searching for something. He doesn't want to call it God.
Yeah.
Because maybe, I mean, well, maybe we know we have given actually the whole sense of God quite a bad name.
Yeah.
I mean, when we look at our history of churches and everything that we've done, religion, I mean, we haven't made it really very attractive. We've just talked about the do's and the don'ts, and people just look at Christians in general. It's boring, you're not allowed to do anything, and that's what they then connect possibly to a God that they want to believe in. Well, it doesn't seem that these people are really happy with it. And so talking with this guy, you get the sense like, but you're searching for something, and somehow I'm just wondering what will be the way to somehow let that person know, like, it's actually quite cool to know this God.
So what you're actually suggesting, if I'm understanding you rightly, is that we have a longing within us to connect with something larger than life, to connect with God, to have faith, and that in itself could also be perhaps seen as proof of God's existence.
Yeah.
But how do you explain that? How do you explain that to someone, that this, what you're experiencing, actually proves God?
I think it's only experience. That's the only thing. If you look at what society today looks like, you can have people proving things, and later on there's a big splash in the media, that there's big holes in their theory and it's not correct. You have politicians who lie, you have different public figures who lie. There's a real issue with trust today. So I think the most important thing about faith and about God's existence is to say, try it for yourself. Experience it for yourself. It's not about proof, it's about experience. And I think this is it for me. What I have experienced with God is something that makes me so certain of who He is that I could never say that He doesn't exist, because I've experienced too much personally with God.
But you're talking about experience and it becomes very theoretical. How do I know when I'm experiencing God? If I've never believed, where do I start? You know, if I am on that wobbly place, does God exist, does God not exist? And you're telling me, well, just experience it. What do I do with that?
Look at a baby, a birth. I mean, that's for me one of those moments in my own life when we had our daughter. That was like people call that a spiritual moment, whether you believe in a God or not. When people look at how life comes here on earth, how it all develops, and you look at that, almost everyone would say, like, this is something that is awesome. And this is just like a miracle, whether they connected to God or not. And if you did that, I think those are sort of moments where you could bring in sort of the bigger part of the story, the bigger picture, and can say, like, well, imagine that this is not just something that happened by coincidence or that just is there for the moment, but you look at it and you think of a bigger plan. Think about it, that there is someone behind something that you just see here. There's call it an artist. And here is another piece of this beautiful masterpiece just in front of you. I mean, when I held my baby, my daughter, in my arms, I mean, for me, yes, I believed in God already, but I would like to think if I would not have believed and I would have had something that small in my hands, keeping it here close to me and looking at it, I cannot otherwise imagine that I must have been starting to think like, how did this come about? What is this? What do I have here? Here is life, created by my wife and myself, but here it is, really.
Yeah, but that was done by your wife and yourself. So, you know, where does God's existence come into a baby?
But I remember talking to a young man who'd grown up as a Christian, but didn't have a personal faith. He didn't have a personal relationship with God. He asked all sorts of very intelligent questions that put people in the church really on edge, because some of them, it was very hard to find the answer. And I remember talking to him once, and he said, I really want to experience God. And he was really in pain, because he said, you know, I've grown up as a Christian, but I haven't experienced God. And I said, just continue talking to God about it. Say, I want to experience you. I want to know that you're real. And eventually he did. And the change in him as a person, when he said, I have really felt God in my life, felt him speak to me, I have prayed about certain things, and they have happened in a way that was really amazing.
I mean, so many people ask you the question like, so how do I experience God? And I think it is, just as you say, Karen, it's so much about, are people really looking for, would they really like to meet him?
Or is it just a teaser, like
just
something
like,
you say to a Christian, so prove to me God exists.
Because, I mean, you hear from so many people, when they really start searching, they come with stories and they say like, actually, you know what? This was weird. Did we not talk about it a couple of weeks ago? This is what happened to me this last week. For me, in that relationship, in that journey already, starting to experience more and more of God and recognizing Him in many places and many ways, then you understand that. But people have to start somewhere. And yeah, I believe that God is a God who is very eager to connect with people.
He's very eager to be found.
Yeah.
Well, let's have a look at what some young people think about this particular topic.
There must be a God. The evidence for me is enough to make my own belief rational.
I believe because of personal experiences.
Everything is to do with faith. So even if you don't believe in God, you need to have faith that you don't believe in it.
It's a different feeling you can't find anywhere on earth. When you find God, when it's that moment of experience between yourself and God.
I don't think anybody can prove God exists.
I'll ask him for things, and it's only when it can only be him that would have done it for me. It just reminds me, you know.
I believe God doesn't exist because of science.
I think God exists. Why? Because I'm still breathing. Today I got to wake up, thank God. And that's the main reason why I think God is just there.
And I do believe God exists, and it's something that you experience in your life, something that as you journey through life, things happen to you, and you realize that this could only be God.
We spent the first half discussing the importance of experiencing God, that is actually one of the ways that God proves his own existence, if you can say it that way. One of the arguments, however, that I keep meeting is that there are good people everywhere. So why would we need a God or a religious code to define what is morally good or bad? Moral absolutes, they just exist by themselves, like your hands, your feet. It's just something that comes natural to humans. Yet Christians would claim that that code is something installed by God. How do you deal with that?
I think morality is something that doesn't have a good ring anymore, is it? It's something a little bit negative. But if we look at what happens when we have riots and when a country is falling apart, when we have anarchy, we don't like it. We don't like it when anybody who is strong and has a weapon can go in and take whatever they want from wherever it is, when they can kill and rape. We don't find that very good. So we do all have a certain moral code. And the Bible has an excellent one in the Ten Commandments that talks about not murdering, not stealing, not lying, not being constantly envious of what everybody else has, because it makes you be very dissatisfied with life. And these are not very strange things. They're very natural to us humans. Yeah. Most societies have similar rules.
I mean, you look at the news, and especially for us here in England, having seen the news this last couple of years, and when you mentioned something like riots, I mean, I think almost everyone who was watching the news or was watching the television screen, sort of get this kind of feeling like this is so wrong, what's happening here. I mean, what's not wrong maybe the reason why they were sort of protesting, but what was happening with the violence, just seeing a person with a rucksack, for instance. There was one picture that stays in my mind, having this young man just walking over a bridge somewhere in London with a rucksack, and all of a sudden there was this gang of 3-4 guys just beating him up, and then taking things out of his rucksack while he had been hit down the ground and was just lying there, and you saw people passing by. And I think all within us have this sense like, this is not right. And then it's true. I mean, when you then hear of stories of people having traveled around the world, coming across these kind of tribes in the middle of nowhere, and they didn't have anything, for instance, like a Bible or anything, like no ministers, no preachers, no priests, nothing had been there apparently. And yet, looking at how they would treat one another, there was respect, there was care, there was definitely a sense of what is right and what is wrong. And then, yes, the question is then, where did that come from?
Exactly.
Where did this sense of good or bad come from? And there is no other good explanation at the moment except for believing that it must be some kind of power from outside that brought that inside to tell you this is right or this is wrong.
You're saying that would have been a power to actually impose that on humans wherever they are in the world. Yet other people might argue, well, it's just part of who we are. It's how we are created, or it's how we are evolved, or it's just how we exist.
Mm-hmm.
I don't agree. Sorry, did I cut you off? Because looking at society today, when I talk to people around where I live here in Watford, I see that there's a big difference today when I talk to people and they say what it was like when they were growing up. I was watching TV the other day and these women were talking about going by themselves to school when they were growing up, and how today they would never send their children to walk themselves to school. They always take them, because we feel that we live in a society that's increasingly lawless, where people don't pick up their own rubbish, people don't take responsibility for the area around themselves, they are not considerate of others. And I think that is because of a lack of faith, a lack of relationship with somebody who says, you should be a good person.
Are you suggesting, Karen, that good people are only people of faith?
No, definitely not. There are rotten apples in every barrel. And there are Christians who don't behave like Christians, for sure.
Yeah.
And there are people who don't believe in God at all, who are the most wonderful people.
Yeah. But I believe that it was put in by a force from outside, which I call God. But there are many people in this world that are great people. But there are also great people, like if I were to give an example of, for instance, Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King, everyone has heard about these people. And it's not so much that they were constantly talking about, oh, God is this, God is that. No, they were basically doing it.
Yeah, they were living it.
They were living it. And so if I would have a person come to me and say, like, so are you saying that only the Christians or the people that believe in a God are the right people? I would say, no, I don't believe that. There's many people out there who don't realize that they're really great people, but they also don't realize where this greatness and this goodness came from.
At the same time, one could argue that, if you don't have to be Christian to be a good person, then why would I bother about trying to experience God's existence?
I don't think it's so much that I want to experience God's existence, although there are people walking around who are constantly saying, like, I want to experience Him. But again, in my case, 18 years old, I was not really sort of looking for an experience. I was just not even knowing where to go with my studies. And so I was just having fun, and my grandfather was really very ill. And so one day my mother called me because I was somewhere else in the country, and my mother called me and said, like, you need to come because grandfather is dying. And so I thought, well, yeah, that's the respectful thing you do. So we went to the hospital, and while we were driving to the hospital, I told my mother that I had no clue what to do. And so I thought, you know what, let me just do something at least. And so I decided to go to just a seminary, just a school, just to do some studies, and just to fill the year and see where it would go. And so we went to the hospital, and on the way, while we were going there, my mother said to me, don't be shocked, because when you get into the hospital and when we come into the room, you will not recognize your grandfather. well, I still didn't really know what to expect. But we went into the room, and as we went in there, indeed, my grandfather was a huge, tall man. But in that bed was just a little shriveled old man, couldn't speak, was completely drugged out because of all the pain and the disease that he was going through. And so there was no response. And so my mother also told me right there in the room, she said, grandfather has not been giving any sign of life for the last month. He's just under a lot of morphine against the pain. There's no response. But why don't you tell him what you're going to do, that you're going to a school, to the seminary, and just see where that leads? And so she said, why don't you tell him? So I went to his bed and I just told him. I mean, if you would know my mother, you don't argue with her, you just do what she tells you to. And so I went to the bed, I told him, like, grandfather, I'm going to go to the seminary school, just to do some studies. And she looked at me, she said, you will have to yell to him, because my grandfather was a deaf man, and so he had his hearing aids, and the hearing aids were on the table on his side. And she said, you have to yell to him, which I felt was really weird, because you don't do that in a room where a person is dying. But again, my mother, very adamant, said, like, you better scream so he can hear you. So I screamed at him, I said, like, Granddad, I'm going to go to the seminary school, and who knows what will happen. And you know what happened? He opened his eyes. He opened his eyes and he said, tell it to the people about God. Oh. That was all he said. And so if I then look back at that, and it was just because my mother was there that I would believe it now still, that it happened. There was a person who witnessed it well. But that has always stayed with me, that I was not looking for God, but I know God was looking for me. And I know now that God is looking for anyone. And He will find ways. God is awesome. He will find ways somehow to come through to a person. And so whether we would like to prove His existence, I don't think it's my job to have to do that. I leave that to Him. He will make sure that He comes through.
I think that's a very powerful story, Geert, and thank you so much for sharing that, because that is very personal as well. Yeah. You are kind of suggesting that perhaps we get too bogged down in feeling we have to prove God, and are you suggesting here that we don't have to prove God, that God proves Himself?
He does. He does.
I think one of the big things, Christians sometimes feel very defensive about the Bible, because the Bible comes under a lot of criticism in the media. There are a lot of programs that are looking at the Bible and criticizing the veracity and so on. And I don't worry about it, because I have seen so many times people who are looking for God and who start to read the Bible and how they find God. So I don't have to defend God. I don't have to defend the Bible. He is so much more powerful than any human being, that if you just start reading the Bible with an open mind, not a closed critical mind, but with an open mind, God will find you.
Yeah. But if God will find us, whatever we do, if we are searching and truly having an open heart and wanting to experience God, as you were saying we can, then why this big argument over the existence of God that we constantly are met with, constantly bombarded, perhaps more from scientists? What is this urge of our society today to have to prove God?
Maybe it's a yearning to finally see that God exists. I don't know.
I mean, we haven't used the Bible at all. I mean, really, we haven't been sitting here opening the Bible and say, okay, now here it says, this is what you need to do, this is where you go. I think in the end, it's all about personal experience and then relating to people, sharing. When you come to the argument about, like, I mean, I've had people coming to me and say, like, so you believe that God exists, but I don't believe in it. I just think that everything just happened by coincidence, or this earth is just part of a big bang or anything like that. And when they put these things in front of me, I can almost sense that they feel, by giving me those kind of reasons for that the world exists and it doesn't need a God, that will sort of then prove to me like God doesn't exist. There's no need for Him, because this world, we're all just here because of the Big Bang. Well, actually, I think that God is bigger than that, than this whole kind of thing. I mean, He can work with the Big Bang. I have no problem with when people would come with the argument like, well, the world exists because of the Big Bang. Well, who says that God couldn't use that? God is greater than that. He would use a Big Bang, and it's there. I mean, I believe in a God who could just say a word and it would be there. Well, if he would be there out there somewhere in the huge universe, which is so big that there cannot just be only one little tiny planet there with some life, because it would be, as someone had said a long time ago in a movie, that would be an awful waste of space if we would be the only one fitting there in that huge universe. I mean, God talks and it's there. So if he needed a big bang, he would say, okay, big bang, and it's there. And I have no problem with that, with those kind of arguments. But at the same time, when people come with these arguments, I hope always that I will show respect for their point of view. And I think that is where we sometimes might have gone wrong in these kind of discussions. We want to prove. Well, leave it to God, he will prove it his way, but also respect the people for what they think.
But I think the respect has to go both ways. Yeah. I've seen sometimes that the religion that is the most trashed is the Christian. In media we tend to be much more respectful of Muslims and Buddhists and secular people who don't have any belief, but the Christians are constantly trashed, and I would like to see that stop. It would be nice, because we should all give respect to other people, whatever their beliefs or lack of beliefs are.
But I think that's also because for a lot of time it was only the Christian sort of thing that ruled everything. Everything was Christian. Yeah. And we are living now in a society where we come across a lot of more different views on life, on spirituality. I mean, our societies are now mixed. It's not just the English people together or whatever country you're coming from. No, we are a mixed society, and that mixed society brings all these different views in there. But the great thing is that in all these great things, you see, everyone is looking for something. Yeah. And I think, so we have a common thing. We're all looking for something. Something that's bigger than ourselves. We want to believe in something outside us.
Yeah. So as we've been talking about how we're looking for something bigger outside of us, how we are yearning for connecting in a relationship with a higher being, we just talked a lot around the existence of God. But what is it, if you're going to sum it up in one last sentence, in our self-sufficient lives, what difference does the existence of God actually make to you?
I have somebody to trust every day of my life.
And I have something that gives me hope, gives me a purpose. I'm going somewhere.
I want to thank you so much for joining in today's discussions, and why not add your voice to the debate by joining us on our Facebook page @FaithTalks. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next time.